Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about Commander data and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz and I'm joined by my fantastic co-hosts. Up first, if he plays the new Ral Otter Planeswalker, he'll always say, "It's utterly fantastic." It's Matt Morgan.
So Joey, I was asked why did the turtle cross the road, and I didn't really have a good answer because the turtle was still crossing. He was taking a shell of a long time, and I couldn't think of anything good to say.
Oh man, I can't. You really torture. No, okay, never mind. I don't have a follow-up pun to that. Actually, that's just brilliant.
Yeah, just move on. That was a nice try, though.
I'll move on, but I will do so at a slow pace, much like the turtle. All right.
There it is.
Up next, if he ever attacks Matt's Ral Otter Planeswalker, he'll say, "Well, Matt, you oughter know better." It's Dana Roach.
My therapist told me yesterday that I have an inferiority complex, which, as far as complexes go, seems like it's not a very good one. So I really don't know what to do with that. Maybe find a better one, I guess. I don't know if I can, though.
Okay. Oh, no. Dana, I'm not going to lie. You're hitting a little close to home right now, actually, buddy.
That's
a little too real, actually. Okay.
I'm in this picture and I don't like it.
Yes, exactly that. All right. Guys, what is it that we are talking about on this week's episode?
So this week we're going to talk about how we get the urge to optimize our decks, but what does that really mean, and how many different levels does that go into?
Yeah, the urge to optimize, and what is it that actually does make a deck better? And are there ways that trying to make a deck better actually clashes with the other ways you're trying to make a deck better? Matt, this is an interesting topic that you brought up, and I'm really excited to dive into it because you've got some cool ideas cooking, and I'm excited to see all of your thoughts on this one especially. So yeah, we'll get into it after some real quick shout-outs that we got to do first.
I take a bike ride every morning to start out my day, and I always wear a helmet to keep my head safe. And Ultimate Guard's katana sleeves and Bulger deck boxes are like a bike helmet for your cards. They'll keep them protected and safe from accidents. And unlike my bike helmet, which has like a little propeller on top, they're stylish and sleek. It's a top-notch product, and the prices are more than reasonable, and we can't recommend them enough.
Wow, that's an image. Oh, Lord, Dana. Although, PSA, don't use the Boulder deck boxes as your bike helmet. That's a quick clarification.
Yes, it's an excellent product, but I'm not sure they would keep you safe in a collision.
Yeah, use your card safe for sure, though.
Probably.
Well, another thing that won't keep you safe in any bike collisions, but still great to have around, is a membership to patreon.com/EDHRECast. We have all sorts of different tier levels. It's just a great way to support the show. I mean, you can support us by either liking this video, subscribing on YouTube, subscribing on your local podcast app, or leaving a review. Those are all great ways to support us, and we appreciate all of that. But if you want to get yourself some perks in exchange, like joining our Discord community, seeing all of the episodes a day early, you can hear how awkward of a read this was. You can do that a day early at patreon.com/EDHRECast. Or you can do what our weekly patron shoutout did, who was Anusira Gupta. And so, Anusira, thank you so much for the support. You also probably shouldn't trust us in a car wreck, a bike wreck, but we appreciate the support, much like you probably would appreciate that bike helmet that Dana has with the propeller and everything like that.
I was just going to say, Anusira Gupta, thank you so much for your support and for allowing us the ability to continue the show and for Dana to continue to afford propeller hat bike helmets. So terrific. Okay. I think we got to get back on track here, you guys. So, Matt, we are talking about the urge to optimize decks. And what exactly is it that makes a deck, quote, better in Commander? Where do we start off with this topic? Because it seems kind of sprawling, to be honest.
It really is. And so I was actually, believe it or not, Joey, and you used to edit my articles that I wrote years and years ago. Mm-hmm. And I thought about getting back into that, but I also thought, well, we also have three voices that we can kind of have this discussion on, because I was updating a deck for myself and I was just kind of rolling around like, why do I want to update this? And like, well, I like this card, but I don't really want to play it. And I kind of just got to thinking more and more that there's so many different ways that you make a deck, quote, better. And how does that work? What does it look like, whether it's functionally better or just anything else that kind of impacts your decisions when you're changing cards in your decks?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing because realistically, the end path to optimization, if you say I am making my deck better, I'm improving it, I'm optimizing it, the end point of that is CEDH. So if you're not, and that's not a bad thing, but like if you're not playing CEDH, your deck is not truly optimized. So we all are drawing those lines somewhere if we're not playing a CEDH deck. It's interesting to see what people draw what lines in what places, though. Because everyone does it in a different way, I think.
And that was one of the things that I kind of broke down is, yes, you can make things like hyper optimized functionally, but I think there's other ways that people optimize their decks, and that's kind of where the root of this discussion comes from. So yes, you can make things functionally better. That is one way that you can optimize your deck. But the other two things that I think you can optimize your deck on is to make it better experientially, as far as people playing the deck, like you are having more fun experiencing the deck, but also a third better that you can optimize on is socially better. And so there's three different axes that I really think that people can optimize their decks on. And it's not just the functionally better, because that all leads to the same endpoint. Whereas I think the other two can just stray so far from what the other ones could be doing.
That's just it. Like the act of tuning up a deck, these are different pathways that you can go through. And a lot of these ideas that you're bringing up here, Matt, some of them clash with each other. So let's start off with that first one, making a deck functionally better. What do you mean by that? Like I have a picture in my head, but what is it that like immediately jumps to mind for you for making a deck functionally better?
Yeah, so when I was doing this, it's kind of like what Dana mentioned. All roads lead to CEDH. If you're doing that optimization, you're doing the absolute best thing, the most efficient way that you can get to whatever it is. Lowering the curve is a natural evolution. Like we're getting strictly better versions of cards sometimes. We're getting, okay, well, it's a naturalize, but it only costs 1 mana instead of 2. We're getting upgrades like that all the time. And we've done a ton of episodes about the curve lowering in Commander until we're kind of reaching that tipping point. And that's what I mean by functionally better. Just you're getting more efficient versions of cards, more powerful cards. And that's just part of kind of, I think, the progression of Magic the Gathering overall, not just for any given deck.
Yeah, exactly. So as another kind of example to compare this, like when I think of functionally better, Matt, a removal spell that you've talked about before is Astarion's Thirst, which you love that one. It exiles an opponent's creature and then your commander gets +1 counters equal to either the power or the mana cost of the thing that you exiled. What a fun card. But in terms of like actual optimization, there are times where that's not going to be the most efficient thing that you could play.
Right.
And so making your deck tune up, making it functionally better, would probably involve swapping that card out. Or a ramp spell like Harvest Season, I think is the name, which ramps you for each of your tapped creatures, also can be a little bit swingy, a little bit hit or miss. And just making that like a 2-mana spell that definitely gets you a land at a turn earlier even, that is going to be an example of like, I'm making my deck functionally better, a lot more reliable during the game. But you are losing something. And I think what you're losing is that experientially better that you were talking about.
Yeah, and for me, like I really struggle to define what things I'm willing to upgrade to make a deck functionally better and which things I'm not. I know it when I see it, but I would have a tough time categorizing it. Like if they released a third version of the Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile, 1 mana remove a creature thing, I would probably put it into my decks because it's probably a better removal spell than whatever the third creature removal spell I have is. But if they released another Mana Crypt, I'm not running the first Mana Crypt. It's definitely better than the Arcane Signet I'm running, but like, why is one of those things an upgrade I would make and one isn't? I don't really know how to define that or why I make that choice. But it's definitely something that I do. There's some upgrades I will absolutely look for, and there's some that I won't.
Well, and I think that most people, like when folks ask for help on their decks, like help me make this better, that's where so many of the recommendations are going to come from too. Like people think, well, I don't really know how to make your experience better. I don't know how to make kind of things adjust to your social group. That's something that it's so hard for people to give recommendations on. So functionally better is that's the category that I think so many people give feedback to others on their decks from as well. It's how to make this deck function better as far as efficiency, more powerful, anything like that.
Yeah, like you can absolutely receive advice that does make your deck more optimized, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll like it more.
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, optimized and better aren't necessarily synonyms.
Right.
And they can be, depending on like what the playing experience you're looking for is. Like I wouldn't say they're not either, but like they don't have to be depending on what you're trying to do.
And I think this kind of moves us pretty naturally into that, making something experientially better, as you mentioned, Matt. I think a lot of like theme stuff, or I think you've written down pet cards here. That can be the kind of thing that really makes you smile, makes you happy to play them. For example, I have a deck that's all around time. I'm trying to get a whole bunch of upkeeps. It's actually my Rule 0 Doctor Who deck, where every time the Doctor dies, it regenerates to the next Doctor, and I'm making it a time themed deck. So I'm playing cards like Aeon Engine in that deck, which reverses the turn order because it's playing with time. Or I'm playing the card Telling Time, which is an interesting cantrip, but lordy, has that one been really outclassed by a lot of other cantrips that exist out there. But they bring a smile to my face. But like, is that deck optimized? Absolutely not. But if I were to make it functionally better, if I were to put good cards into those slots instead, I would have a less fun time with that deck. And I think my opponents probably would too, because I think it makes me smile, and I think it makes other people smile when they see the weird, silly stuff that I'm up to instead.
Well, in listening to you say that, Joey, that kind of actually clarifies the thing I said 2 minutes ago about how I didn't understand why I draw lines in the places I draw them, because I think that is where I draw them. I think for me, upgrades and optimizations I make that impact my play experience, I'm much more comfortable with than upgrades I make that impact someone else's play experience. So, for example, a mana crypt in my deck impacts everyone else. I'm playing that much faster. Whereas a slightly more efficient removal spell, I'm still casting that removal spell. I'm going to take out that scary commander no matter what. It's not really changing what's going to happen to you, but it is making my life a little bit easier. So for me, I think maybe that's where that line is drawn. I do optimizations that kind of impact me and my quality of life, and I tend to not make ones that warp the game around how everyone else is experiencing my deck, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think another way that you've done that, Dana, that I think I can point to specifically as kind of my thought process when I was coming to this point was your Gliss of the Traitor deck. We used to joke that you don't play that deck towards the end of the night. I'm sure you've taken cards out of that deck because just the mental labor that you have to put into that. Sure, it was just a better experience for you, for your opponents, anything like that. That's to me where the experientially better kind of section comes from, because it's something that is just making the whole experience, not just for you, but for the other people, it's better. It's more fun to play for you, whether it's putting in pet cards, you're taking out cards that are hard to play or hard to resolve, stuff like that. That's, to me, where so much of that comes from.
I have lost count of the amount of people that have said, yes, this deck will be better with Catherine's Crusade, but...
That's the example I was going to use too.
It's not better. It's better, but it's not better, right? It's stronger and more powerful and maybe more optimized, but it's not better to play, and it's not a better play experience.
It's not the right card, because obviously you could optimize that and it's objectively a powerful card for sure.
Absolutely.
But it's the right card for you because this is what you want to do. You don't want to put yourself through that or put other people through that.
Yeah. And there is, again, just a little bit of a clash there, because I feel like we are very encouraged to find those moments for like, all right, I got to make sure that this deck like can function. That's why I want it to be functionally better. And so that's why we, aim for the Toxic Deluges of the world. But like the amount of fun that I have casting a Toxic Deluge, it's pretty small.
Sure.
It's reliable, and that's why it's there, and it'll get me out of really tough binds, which is why I am glad to have it. But at the same time, when I think of other board wipe type of effects that I could be playing, like, I don't know, I haven't put a Hex into a deck. That's the 6-mana black sorcery, destroy 6 target creatures. But man, I like that spell. I really like that spell. I don't think it's good, but when I cast it, man, does it make me smile. And like, that's the clash. Those things are competing for the same spot. And like, I'd want to put Hex into my deck, but I feel like I'd be as much as it would make me smile, I think the times that I'd actually draw it and have the ability to cast it, it wouldn't kill off the things that I need to kill enough times that I would then not have the smile. And so like, that's these clashes that I keep on being like, what do I actually decide to put into this dang deck when I'm trying to tune it?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever cast a Damnation and then and felt like, oh man, that really felt good. That was exciting, and I'm going to remember that. It's a better card, in a general sense, than Decree of Pain. That draws me a card for every creature I destroy, but costs all the mana in the world.
Yeah.
But Decree of Pain is so much fun to cast. That feels
Yes.
so good to do that board wipe and then draw 12 cards or something. Like Damnation's a better card. Decree of Pain is a better play experience for me.
And for me, we talk about counter spells, but we've talked on this show all the time. Like, you can do counterspell and that's fine, but I love Access Denied or Spell Swindle or Dana, Overwhelming Intellect. All of those cards, it's still a counterspell, but you're getting something else for your efforts. The 5 mana board wipes that we've talked about since the beginning of the show, those are the types of cards that you're just getting to express personality. You're getting to express whatever you want to be doing, because Dana, that's a huge piece of why you play Commander, is the expression, the getting to do something you can't do in other formats. And I think just people get to kind of express themselves so much more because of this category of, how do I make this my deck, not just the EDHREC average deck that you just copy and paste.
Yeah, and it's about finding that balance too. Like, don't get me wrong, I as much as I love Decree of Pain and Overwhelming Intellect and spells like that, I'm not just running like 6 and 8 and 12 drops that are fun. You have to find a balance to to make your deck playable. But like that's one of those forms of optimization, is like finding a way to strike that balance between having your deck be functional while also being able to play those cards that to me are fun.
That's the weird irony of it, right? Is that like I've used this in a past video, this example before, but there's this weird irony of like decks that are trying to make, let's say, an Oops All Crabs deck, or new stuff is coming out with like otters and lizards. Well, there's not a whole bunch of support for those necessarily. And so to try and
once Bloomburrow comes out, though, Joey, 100% will be different.
When you have a silly, janky, and lesser supported theme type of deck that you're trying to jumpstart into being alive, one of the ways to guarantee that it is going to actually like work in a game is to put a whole bunch of the classic staple good stuff cards into it. The Cyclonic Rifts, the Torment of Hailfires, things like that. And there's this weird irony where like I have a Wilhelt zombie deck, which I adore, and I don't feel pressure to put the classic staple, the crazy powerhouse cards into that deck, because there's already enough support for it. And so that's just this odd thing of like, we're trying to force both the experience of like, oh, here's this janky thing this odd theme that I'm trying to make work. But in order to even like make it work and have any chance of doing anything in a game, you pair it with all these cards that are like swinging all the way on the other end of the spectrum. And like both of those sitting in the same deck can sometimes feel a little bit like, whoa, what is the experience I'm actually going for here? Trying to fuse the experience with the functionally better. It can start to feel a little bit hodgepodgey when you're playing it. A little bit like, what am I doing? Am I good stuff deck or am I crabs deck? What's happening here?
Well, and then on the other hand, you have situations where like someone has their crab deck, and then we get a crab deck precon or something, and there are people that then are like disappointed. Oh, I've gotten so much support from my crab deck now that it no longer feels like it's no longer my crab deck, it's a crab deck. So like for some folks that is a way too, like they're by support showing up and the deck becoming more optimized and easier to play and having more tools, it becomes less optimized for their personal level of fun.
Well, and I think that kind of happened too. We talked a lot about, we want a Teamer Energy Commander. We wanted something that's going to support that theme. And then we got a ton of energy cards in the past 6 months. And so now it went from, well, I tried really hard and played every energy card I could to scrap together a deck. And now it's just an energy deck. It wasn't your energy deck. And a little bit to the same thing. Like Dana, you and I, we have our Eldrazi, Zion, and Spawn decks. We both went out of our way. We brewed up something that like could actually function. We played a lot of bad cards.
Yeah.
And we found a way to make it work. Well, now they're not unique so much anymore because there's a ton of support now, thanks to Modern Horizons 3 for Eldrazi Scions, Eldrazi Spawns, and being able to kind of play a bunch of different combinations of those.
There's a recurring theme on this show, if you were to go back through past episodes, of us stating we wish we had a thing, and then a year later being like, why did we get that thing? Like this is a conversation we've had about a dozen different topics over the years where, yeah, sometimes when you get the thing you wish for, it's not really the thing you wanted.
Well, I want to turn something back to something that you mentioned earlier, Dana, about where you're drawing those lines. One of the lines that you drew about, like, how do I decide between what I am functionally improving and optimizing within my deck versus what cards I'm playing that are more for me. And one of the notes that you hit on there was also like the way it impacts the experience of other players. And that goes to that third pillar that Matt brought up at the beginning of the show as well. There were functionally better cards that you can optimize your deck with. There are experientially better cards where you can take out the Cathar's Crusade, or you can put in the Asterion's Thirst, and those things that you personally enjoy, even if they're not always optimal. But then there's also the category of something that is socially better.
Yeah, the socially better pillar, Joey, I really like the way you put that. That's just making sure that other people want to come back and play that deck. We coined the term a long time ago that play the types of decks that you would want to lose to. That is 100% rooted in this socially better optimization of decks that, I have never seen this card before. Holy cow. We have a bunch of people that we get to interact with at Magic Cons that have these socially amazing decks to play against. And they just pull up all these obscure cards that just work so well with what they're trying to do. And these are the decks that people leave the game and just like, man, that was such a fun thing because of X.
Yeah, and to be clear here, just because we like a thing socially, or we're going to use some examples here for things that like are socially better in the games we are looking to play. We're not saying you're wrong if you don't agree with that, or if your meta plays differently than that.
No, they're 100% wrong, Dana. We're the arbiters of what is correct.
Actually. We are authoritarians.
Well, I was thinking that, but like I didn't want to say it out loud. but no, like we're using examples that like reflect the games and the pods we play in. But like if yours don't match that, I'm not telling you that like you shouldn't play Constant Mists. Constant Mists is an amazing card. It's not one I play because it creates a situation where I feel like I'm kind of locking out the game, and I don't want to lock out the game. But if that's a fun thing for your friends to fight through, there's nothing wrong with that. So we're talking about what's socially better for the experience we're in, the meta we're in, the games we're in, and that's maybe different for you.
Yeah, this aspect of optimization probably fluxes the most.
Absolutely.
Any single thing that we're talking about today, because every playgroup has different preferences. Every category, you go to one shop and some things, maybe that shop has a house ban list that they want people to use. That's going to change from store to store. That's going to change from playgroup to playgroup. And whether you're playing socially, you're playing pre-cons, or you're playing CEDH, that all comes down to the social piece of what am I going to do that's going to get me invited back to another game? And that changes so much from person to person.
And it really does feel like, you mentioned the Constant Mists example. Constant Mists, or like Moat, preventing all non-flyers from attacking. There's a difference between those types of cards and the blowouts like an Aether Spouts or a Selfless Squire, where the entire table is like, whoa! Like those are things that create huge blowout moments. And like Commander players, honestly, I love losing spectacularly. I think it's actually kind of fun. And those spectacular like blowout type of moments are the kinds of things I search for. They're fantastic to see. I delight in my own downfall during those moments. And so like those are the types of things that I try to pay attention to as well. It's like these are very different tones, Constant Mists versus the huge blowout style cards.
Yeah, and again, like we said, that shifts from meta to meta to meta. There's probably environments where if you are not playing the Mana Crypt, or you're not playing the Constant Mists, you are therefore the problem. You are creating a socially worse experience because everyone's looking for that. So I don't know why I'm so hung up on like reassuring everyone that the way I play isn't me insisting that that's the way you play, but
I appreciate
I do want to make that clear. We're talking about because we share the same kind of outlook on this, right? So it's easy for us to get in our own kind of bubble talking about those games, but I want people to make sure we know like this isn't a judgment about you doing it differently. Just be aware in a general sense for your environment what makes for a socially better game.
But it is the kind of thing that we take pretty seriously though, which is why we want to talk about it in the ways that would like I've taken apart entire decks as a result of them not being socially better. Like I used to have a Commander Graven deck, which is the red-black Graven who would get huge depending on how much life you'd lost. That deck was so efficient at thundering down a single person out of the game really, really quickly. And then they would sit there for like half an hour as the rest of the game finished up because the game that deck was good at like getting one person down pretty quick, but not always reliable at getting the other two down pretty quick. Well, I just felt so bad. Like the deck was good. I won plenty of games with it.
Sure.
But I just felt bad for the way that experience landed for that one unlucky person who my strategy kind of dictates, all right, thunder one person down. So like that's a reason that we take this so seriously.
I actually have an example of this that just occurred in a game I played recently. A player had a weird situation where they basically had a Grave Pact lock on the board. And it was a something they didn't set up. They had a great back in their deck, obviously, but like it came out and the Sacrifice Engine was a card they had taken from somebody else with a Gonti, and it just was a perfect storm of Bitter Blossom tokens and a way to always have a way to take things out. And the person even said, like, I always listen, when I listen to your show, I've always really loved that lesson that you said about like creating a good story and creating a good experience. So I feel really bad about this. And because he was aware of it and was like, you know, we talked about it, like it wasn't a bad experience, but like the person was aware, like socially, I created this situation and it's not really what I wanted to do in this game.
Yeah, I certainly think they make themselves known in those moments when they happen. I mean, there are entire archetypes of cards that Game Nights avoids putting onto the show, right? Because of the experience that they create, not just during the game, but for people watching them as well. So I think that like they're the kind of things that you know them when you see them, probably. Mm-hmm. This has been interesting, but an aspect that I also kind of want to get to, especially about the clash between making a deck functionally better or socially better, are the times when like maybe those things don't actually contradict. There are times where actually they can coexist or they do line up, but I think we might have to save that for part 2 after some challenging the stats. What do you guys say?
Let's do it.
Wow, Jinx, you guys owe me a soda.
Well, actually, Jinx, Dana owes me, so you didn't say it at the same time. Joey, come on. Learn the rules of Jinx.
But I can edit myself to make it sound like I also said it at the same time.
Joey has to cheat to win. Sounds like a personal problem.
All this talk of Jinxes just has me like excited for Arcane Season 2.
There it is.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. We compare a lot of cards to each other to decide which one we actually want to put into our deck. And when you spend a bunch of time comparing things, it's easy to also start doing that to yourself and to compare your life to other people's. I know I've had that habit, and social media has definitely exacerbated it. Comparison is the thief of joy, as they say. It's a habit that I've been working to unlearn, and I think becoming more in tune with yourself and talking through your abstract feelings or back-of-the-mind anxieties can be a big help. And hey, wouldn't you know it? That's what therapy can help with too. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have. If you're thinking of starting therapy, maybe give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/EDH today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/EDH.
So I have a challenge this week for the card Demolition Field, which is already in a lot of decks. But this was something I saw in a game recently, and then as I was thinking about it, I saw a post on Twitter from Games Freak SA, who's a writer at EDHREC, posted something similar. There's 2 cards in Magic: Warped Landscape, it's in about 13,000 decks, and a Terminal Moraine, which is in about 6,000. Both are kind of budget fetch lands. You can sacrifice either of them and search your library for a basic land card to put it into play tapped and then shuffle at the cost of 2 mana. Like I mentioned, those are in, a decent amount of decks out there. Demolition Field does the same thing for the same cost. 2 mana to activate, sacrifice a land, but it also destroys one of your opponent's lands at the same time and lets them go search up one. Yes, technically there are situations where, like, if your opponent's playing a landfall deck, maybe you wouldn't want to blow up one of their lands, but you just pick a different opponent. If you are playing a Warped Landscape or Terminal Moraine in your deck, Demolition Field is just a better version of the exact same thing that will actually solve a problem plenty of times too. Don't run Warped Landscape, don't run Terminal Moraine, run Demolition Field instead if you're using either one of those cards.
Nice. All right, I'm going to move to my challenge here, and this is actually our listener-submitted challenge. And y'all, buckle up, I've got a story to share. This is from a fan of the show whose name is Charles, and I got to play a game with them a little bit ago, and one of the weirdest things ever happened in that game. It was so specific, so situational, and it's a memory that is going to have me going, whoa, for a really long time. The deck that Charles was playing was Marchesa, Dealer of Death, the new Grixis Marchesa from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. As a quick recap on that one, it's the Grixis 3/4 human rogue. Whenever you commit a crime, and as a reminder, committing a crime means targeting opponents or anything they control or stuff in their graveyard. Whenever you commit a crime, you may pay 1 generic mana. If you do, you look at the top 2 cards of your library, you put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So, anytime that you Gitaxian Probe, you can also pay a mana, and get a little bit of card advantage out of it. Or more likely, when you cast some removal spells on people's stuff, you'll still be able to get some extra card advantage from it. So it's a really interesting deck for sure. Charles was playing a card that I had never heard of. Dana, this is an old card for old fogies like you. Maybe you'll know it. Spatial Binding from Mirage. Are you familiar by any chance?
I am, top of my head, I am not.
This is a 2-mana Dimir enchantment that says you can pay 1 life as an activated ability, and target permanent cannot phase out until the beginning of your next upkeep. So Charles was just using this as a way to pay a life. I've committed a crime by targeting one of your creatures, which was hilarious. Just at any moment, all right, I'll target one of your creatures, I pay a life, and then I pay 1 mana to do the Marchesa effect. And it was just a really easy way, like 1 mana, pay a life, and look at the top 2 cards of my deck and pick one to keep. Honestly, that was really efficient. And it's only currently in 13% of the 1800 Marchesa Dealer of Death decks out there. Like, that number needs to go up. So, Charles, thank you so much for bringing this card to my attention. This is a fantastic challenge. But here's the story time, you guys. This card saved that game in a way I never expected. Because I was facing down a lethal board state against this Marchesa deck. Just a whole bunch of suddenly hasty creatures. And I had in my hand a Galadriel's Dismissal, which is one of my favorite new ways to stop opponents from being able to block my stuff or being able to attack me. To phase out their entire board. Well, it turns out, with Spatial Binding, that didn't work. This wildly niche situation arose where, yeah, I tried to Galadriel's Dismissal an entire oncoming onslaught of creatures and just pay 1 life, this creature can't phase out. Pay 1 life, this creature can't phase out. Pay 1 life, this creature can't phase out. And just by paying a couple of life, actually managed to stop me from erasing the field. So if you really dislike cards like Teferi's Protection and Clever Concealment and Galadriel's Dismissal, check out Spatial Binding as a way to commit some crimes and also stop people's stuff from disappearing. This was so niche and so memorable. Charles, thank you for a fantastic submission for Challenge to Stats and for a fantastic game.
All right, well, I will wrap us up then real quick. And so I have a challenge. So a friend of mine is building the new Imskir Iron Eater from Modern Horizons 3. Just Bosch Iron Golem, only just worlds better somehow, which wasn't really something that we needed, but we did get, as we were talking about a second ago. So Imskir Iron Eater has affinity for artifacts. When it enters the battlefield, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is half the number of artifacts you control rounded down. Then you can sacrifice an artifact, pay 4 mana. Imskir deals damage equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value to any target. So one thing that my friend noticed is like, well, I'm goldfishing the deck and I just have no life ever because I play a bunch of artifacts, I cast Imskir out, but then I just lose a bunch of life to that enter the battlefield ability. And they didn't really know how to trick shot around that and kind of shop through it. And I just immediately thought, like, why not add some lifelink? It's so simple. Put lifelink onto Imskir. You're flinging artifacts anyways. Gain all that life back. It's just a great way to do that. And a card that they hadn't thought of yet, but I actually really, really like. And Dana, I know this is a card you love. Mask of Gristlebrand. Absolutely fantastic card for this type of deck. So Mask of Gristlebrand, 1 black for a legendary equipment. And it says equipped creature has flying and lifelink. Whenever equipped creature dies, you may pay X life or X is its power. And if you do, you draw X cards and it equips for 3. So Mask of Gristlebrand right away solves so many problems with what you could be trying to do with Imskir. And it's only getting played in about 11% of decks right now. And I think just so many people, you need to be adding that in there. There's some great ways to give everything lifelink. Basilisk Collar is already getting played in 41% of Imskir decks. That's a great start. You also have Shadow Spear, but Shadow Spear is also $30. So I can't really in good conscience recommend that as a challenge. But Mask of Gristlebrand is fantastic. It's $1. It's so much easier to slot that in. You're going to give Imskir all the lifelink, so when it enters, you're going to get all your card draw, but you can just start flinging artifacts all over the place and gaining all that life back. Such a fantastic way to get around one of the deck's weaknesses, get all that life gain back in. Super easy to do. I love Mask of Gristlebrand for this deck. They bought a copy, and hopefully it works out for them. And hopefully, listeners, if you're also building Imskir, it's going to work out for you too.
Nice stuff. Okay, guys, let's get back into our topic here, talking about ways of making your deck better. And we've talked a lot so far about the ways that trying to make your deck better can sometimes clash with other ways that you might be trying to improve the deck as well. A lot of things that would make a deck functionally better can sometimes clash with making it socially better. We just mentioned like Grave Pact and other types of lockdown pieces. Well, those might be really optimal for your deck, but the social experience that they create, are you, losing something on that front? Specifically, before we got to challenge the stats, though, I did kind of hint at a question that I wanted to put to the group. Are there times you think where making something functionally better can also make it socially better, or vice versa? Are there times where these things actually do align more often? And how is it that we go about like finding those moments?
I mean, I think if you're looking at two that complement each other, I think experientially better and the socially better, those two kind of go hand in hand. One is internal facing and one is external facing. It doesn't have so much to do with like how powerful the cards are necessarily, but it's more about the experience and what it's doing outside of the game, but like how people are going about it. I think you can definitely make things experientially better and socially better pretty easily. And a lot of times that might have a lot of overlap anyways, because I know for sure, like the Grave Pact Dictative Erebos example, I hate playing against those. I have a friend who they would play some of those Saproling decks that, I'm just going to make infinite Saprolings, infinite triggers, and you just never get to have a board. But also, that's a lot of mental labor. And eventually my friend's like, I don't like doing that anymore because A, people don't get to play very often, but also B, like, it's just kind of repetitive. It's the same loop over and over. And like, that's just not what I'm looking for in the deck anymore. So I think a lot of times you can make something on one of those two pillars and it's going to affect that other one directly too, because I think, like I said, the most overlap between any of the categories is probably these two.
Dana, what do you think?
The example I come up with here is many, many years ago. In my Tauran Sky Summoner deck, I had a Jin-Gitaxias Core Augur. Jin-Gitaxias is one of the original Praetors, basically forces everyone to discard at the end of their turn. So like you can very easily leave everyone locked out of being able to play because they have to empty their hand. What I found was, obviously that's socially, folks didn't love playing against that, at least in the meta I played in. Experientially, it didn't create a very good experience, but even when things went perfectly with it, it got me killed. If people weren't able to fight through it, the bullseye I put on my back made it like not worth playing in a lot of ways.
Sure.
I don't remember specifically what I swapped that out with, but the card I swapped it out with, actually, like from a play perspective, was a better card in that deck because it was effective while not drawing the level of hate that Jin-Gitaxias drew. It was an upgrade in every possible way for that card, even though it was like technically probably not as strong, but the balance of drawing me zero attention versus all of the attention was worth the minor drop off in effectiveness. So like there was a card in that situation where in every way, shape, or form, that was an upgrade.
Such a perfect example.
And I think you can totally make changes that they're functionally better in the sense that they're going to get you more wins, because you guys had an episode a couple weeks ago where you talked about drawing too much attention to yourself.
Right.
That can absolutely be an upgrade that it seems counterintuitive. Like, oh, well, this card is better because functionally as a card in a vacuum, it is better, but also does this card draw me too much attention? And that's a kind of change that's going to impact all three categories of how you're optimizing, because yes, I'm able to win more games. The deck is able to function better because it's not drawing me all the bad attention that I don't want, because, I mean, the best permanent removal is player removal, as people love to say. So you're not getting removed immediately because, oh, I know Joey has that card in his deck, I got to take him out early. But also, too, like, it's a more fun deck for you to play because you're not putting other people in this weird situation. And also, people like playing against the deck more because they're not just locked out of a game. And I think Stacks Pieces might be probably the most common example of this, where if you're not in a CEDH pod, if you're playing Stacks Pieces, people are going to pick up on that and they're going to hate you out of the game.
Yeah, just knowing what your deck can do is a liability. And so people will, the reputation can sometimes precede a deck. If your deck doesn't have a good PR campaign, so to speak, better watch out. And that is a thing to be aware of. And sometimes playing better cards does bring with it a bigger limelight. And playing Dana, as you said, switching a couple of things out can reduce the amount of spotlight that you're putting onto yourself and giving yourself stuff like a pseudo kind of hexproof, because they're not drawing the eyes of other people compared to what everyone else is up to. Another example of this, though, kind of in the opposite direction that I wanted to go into, I feel like the pressure, the feeling of pressure, the urge to optimize these decks, the times that I notice I want to take out pet cards from my decks and put in cards that are functionally a little bit better are the times where I've wound up in archenemy positions in a game where someone else is the archenemy, and I wasn't able to really contribute much to dismantling what that archenemy was doing. So it's not just that I couldn't defeat one other player, it's that when it got to my turn, I drew a card and had nothing to contribute to help the other players who were also stuck in that same bad position. And I felt like, well, if I didn't have these silly pet cards in my deck, I'd actually be able to dismantle this a little bit and then unlock the social experience that we're all looking for. And I think that's, for me, one of the bigger pressures, the bigger clashes, I guess, sometimes of this, because technically in that instance, if I take out those cards that I think are, silly pet cards, and I put in more of those classic staples, the good old reliables, I actually am creating, in those instances, a socially better experience, because we're actually able to be social because I used a reliable card to dismantle an archenemy so that we can actually play a little bit more. So that is where I think there are sometimes these things that are a little bit more in alignment, and those clashes sometimes get muddled up in a way that makes it difficult and easy to justify going in either direction. But that's a particular pressure that I wanted to comment on.
Yeah, the way I always think about it with cards is like it's easy to default to thinking about cards in terms of them existing on a spectrum where like over here is good and over here is bad, and your card exists somewhere on that line. And the card you're comparing it to is in one spot and this card is in this spot. But I don't think that's accurate. I think you want to think of it almost like a graphic equalizer on a stereo or something, where there's 15 different like vertical bars, and this card's vertical bar is higher than that one in this particular area, but this one's bar in this other area, like how it affects the game socially, is lower, and this particular metric is higher. And there's a bunch of those different things, and you're trying to evaluate those cards based on all of the bars, not just where it is on one equilibrium.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's not just a sliding scale. It's definitely a three-dimensional way to evaluate, and it's hard shifting gears from that. It's there's the X and Y plot, but then again, we're talking about three different categories. So there's a lot that goes into card evaluation, not just from, well, like this is a new splashy mythic, whatever, but like making sure that you're looking at it from, do I want to play this type of card? And that's one thing that I think I've gotten to appreciate more and more as I've gotten to play at more of the big events lately the past couple of years, is I get to see people like, yeah, I know this card would be good, but I want to play this card, and keeping pet cards in there. And our friend Olivia Gobert Hicks on the rules committee, every time she and I are talking about new cards that are coming out, she'll just whisper to me, just play the cards you want to play. Who cares about the new cards? And then it's fun getting to do like the Architect deck building contest every month too. That's one thing that you'll see on this YouTube channel. We get to see people expressing themselves in so many different ways and finding ways to make all three of these categories we're talking about on this episode expressed in those decks. And it's such a fun thing to watch unfold too.
Yeah, seeing other people's creativity in that way. There's some really nifty decks in those challenges. Y'all should definitely check those videos out.
Absolutely.
People are clever. It's really neat. And you have the chance to win prizes. It's really cool. To kind of hit on another example here too, though, like Dana, I like what you said about cards having those different stats and those different things, but I feel like so much of it can also be context dependent as well. I think of a story that you were telling just before we started recording about using an Imprisoned in the Moon on another person's commander, which, pins it to the field. It really locks it down. And it's really hard to get out from underneath one of those, because it's not like the thing's going back to the command zone. You can just replay it. You're really hammering someone's strategy down. And against certain types of commanders, playing an Imprison, playing a Darksteel Mutation, playing a Song of the Dryads, against certain types of commanders, that can feel really like, oh, the social experience there, I almost kind of feel bad for them. That's really like locking them out of the game.
Yeah.
But in the specific example that you shared, you're playing against a sliver deck. Not once have I ever felt bad about pinning to the field a Tulane, And I actually would argue that playing those are cards that I would call functionally better rather than socially better. And yet at the same time, when I play them on a Tulane, I think I have created a socially better experience for the table. I think that's just very context dependent is the thing that I want to inject into the conversation here.
Absolutely.
The stats are not locked.
There's so many factors to take in, and is it socially better? Yes, but not all the time. Or yes, it depends on the play group. And so one thing, and I don't know how many listeners out there have checked out Mike Carosa. He writes for Commander's Herald, has an entire article series about this. It's just, am I the bolus? Am I the bad guy?
Has a whole podcast about it even.
Has a whole podcast. Yeah. Am I the bullcast?
Yeah.
And it's just such a great way to break down the social aspect, the social pillar that we're talking about. It's all about that. And if you want some great insight that's just funny, Mike does such a fantastic job about, okay, in this specific situation, would I feel bad or would I feel like the bolus, as it were, if I put Imprisoned on the Moon on that Sliver Queen? And knowing Mike, I know on the Sliver Queen, yes, 100%, you are okay, you are in the right. Yeah. But that's not always the same case. And being able to apply different play groups and different situations to your thought process is such a critical thing when you're getting ready. Because I know a lot of people have asked us, like, what decks do you bring to big events? I tend to focus on, like, I want decks that are going to socially have the most fun. I'm not going to take people out of the game, but just leave that up to other players and be able to interact with folks in a positive way.
Yeah, I try to narrow it down to my favorite 20 decks to bring. That way I can have...
real quick, actually, we do have to
travel real lean.
Like, before we attend events, we actually will sometimes ask each other, like, oh, how many decks you're bringing? And I'm usually like, I don't ever bring more than like maybe 6 at most. And then Dana will actually get to the event and Dana will have his entire backpack with him. He's like, yeah, I brought 12.
But Dana also will tell us, I don't plan on taking that many, maybe 5 or 6. And then he shows up and he brought an extra carry-on for his other decks. So, like, it's not that Dana brings the decks. Just be honest with yourself, Dana. We know that you're going to bring more than 10.
I struggle with concept execution there. I have a plan. I just don't always follow through the way I intended.
Meanwhile, I show up with strictly 4 every time.
I'll also say, I've been hitting on this, like, times where some of these columns don't just clash, but like weird moments where they align. And I've used examples of, like, playing some of those more functionally better cards, certain types of removal that can craft a socially better experience. But I would argue that there are sometimes instances, where it can go the opposite way as well. Like, you don't just need to, like, focus on the, like, all right, I got to optimize then so that I can have these moments occur. I would actually say sometimes, Dana, like you said, making your deck a little bit worse so that you stop being targeted, but like you played cards that you enjoyed a little bit more and then you had less of a limelight on you. You did make your deck functionally better by making it socially better. Yeah. I would also say there are a lot of cards out there that are good at guaranteeing that you will win that game, but they will drag a game on to be like 15 turns or whatever. And I would argue that it actually could be in your best interest to find different types of win conditions that are maybe a little bit less reliable, but they'll close a game down much quicker, which means that you're affording your opponents fewer draw steps to try and get out of the thing that you've locked them down in. So, like, that can be another reason where it's like, there actually is a pretty good strategical justification for playing something that's maybe a little bit more on the socially enjoyable side, because it means that it'll actually unlock an experience that is more enjoyable for me, for them. Yeah. And more particularly, they're not going to get as many draw steps. So, like, there are actually some pretty good reasons for trying to find those places where those align, I think.
To use a phrase we use a lot, it's art, not science. Like, it's very difficult to point specifically at this and say this is the correct choice, this is the wrong choice. But it is very, very fluid, and it depends on your play group. And actually, I think your personal play style makes a big difference too. Like, some people are able to play cards and their attitude in the game impacts how people interact with them. Like, you can maybe get away with some things if you are, a fun person to play against, if you're loose and joking and, like, it's an enjoyable experience. There may be things that people will ignore that they won't for somebody else. Like, there's just so many variables to take into account when you make these decisions. It's just different for everybody.
I think, as one final question here, you guys, like, of these 3 pillars, like upgrading a deck to make it functionally better, upgrading it to make your own experience more enjoyable, experientially better, and upgrading a deck to make it socially better, do you think that there's one of those pillars that you prioritize above the others? Like, Matt, is there any one that sticks out to you as the thing that you tend to do first or foremost?
I would say that the 3 of these categories that I consider the most when I'm making my upgrades and the changes to my decks, it's always going to be the experientially better. Like, what decks am I going to play the most? Am I going to enjoy doing the most. And I would say 1, 2, 3 is for myself, then socially for other people, and finally the functionally better upgrades. That would be the tier that I would go to. And I don't think it's like a wide gap. It's really hard to, or it's really easy, I should say, to make it sound like, oh, like there's a gap here. It's pretty tight. Like all three are definitely taken into consideration, but ultimately, like, again, the reason that Dana likes to play Commander is you get to express yourself so much and do things that you don't get to do in other formats. Again, like I'm the one playing the deck. I'm the one that's building the spending the time, the effort, the money, getting this deck to what I want it to be. It's my deck, and I want it to be reflective of that. So definitely experientially better is the way that I tend to optimize first and foremost.
Sure, yeah. I think of the three of us, you're the most likely to have weird pet cards in your deck. Dana's the most likely to have...
Rich Cards expertise everywhere.
Dana's the most likely to have cards that we've never heard of, but he's doing so in an optimization way. Dana, though, I don't need to speak for you, obviously. Is there one that you prioritize?
Yeah, I think experientially, excuse me.
Experimentally.
Third try is a charm. But I think for a little bit different reasons than Matt, I do want it to be a good experience, but there's a strategic element to that.
Yeah.
I think of that Jin Jataxis thing I mentioned. I actually have that in my brain a lot when I build, and I'm very conscious of this experience will allow me to play the game the way I want it to play without drawing unnecessary heat in myself. So like I experientially is a thing I think about, but I think of it in terms of this is going to let me play the game I want to play and let me do the things I want to do, and strategically maybe allow me to win in ways that like drawing attention to myself wouldn't do.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, anyone who's watched a lot of the videos here on the EDHRECast YouTube knows that a lot of the videos are dedicated to like, how do we create a socially good experience for everybody? So that's like definitely a thing that's like occupying the forefront of my mind. But I think the reason it occupies so much of my brain space is because I'm also so driven to optimize my decks and make them functionally better. And so like I'm trying to balance out those two sometimes competing drives. So Matt, I'm so glad that you brought this forward as a topic idea to dive into, because it is tough. It is tough to find a balance between those two things. And Dana, as you said, more art than science.
There's no right answer. Yeah, there's no one right or wrong answer to it. Like, again, these are all things that you take into consideration at all times throughout the deck building process, whether you're building a brand new deck or you're updating a deck, anything like that. So these urges on like, how are you optimizing the deck? Like there's so many different factors that go in. And again, it's going to be up to the individual. It's going to be up to the new cards that are coming out, the theme that's going to make it functionally better or not. And then finally it's going to come up to the play group. So there's so much going on. You can't say any given upgrade or any given change you make to a deck is right or wrong, because there's so much that goes into that decision.
No, Matt, once again, we are the arbiters of what is correct or not. Yes. We established this. Come on, man.
Fair. We are totally authoritative. Yes, you are wrong because you're not doing it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And right now, the right thing to do is to call this episode to a close and ask our listeners what they think about the different ways to upgrade their decks. You know, that was a little ham-fisted as segues go, but I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to stand by that one. This was a great subject, but seriously, we do want to hear from folks about which of these pillars they prioritize, and times where they notice that these things clash with each other, or times where they can actually make them line up. And it's a really interesting conversation to keep having, so I'm excited to see folks' reaction to this one. With that said, calling this episode to a close, I think we also got to let folks know where is it that they can locate us online if they would like to get in touch with us. Matt?
So you can find me on pretty much any social media platform at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, we are proud members of Team Ultimate Guard. So if you want some of the best deck accessories out there, deck boxes, sleeves, all that and more, check out Ultimate Guard for the best you can get.
And Dana?
You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDHREC and Commander's Herald. And you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me at Joseph M. Schultz online, basically everywhere. And you can find the cast at EDHRECast everywhere online. Plus, if you have a question for us, you can contact us at EDHRECast@gmail.com. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.